For best results when doing tooling, it's a good idea to cement your leather down to a piece of cardboard for tooling. This will keep it from stretching and will also allow you to stamp it a little deeper because it'll be absorbed in the cardboard. To do this, we will coat the back of the leather very carefully with rubber cement. And making sure I get good coverage. And as soon as we get this covered, then we will then do the same thing to the cardboard. And now we will allow these to sit for a few minutes and dry until the cement gets tacky. We have allowed the cement to dry until it's just tacky now on both surfaces, so we can carefully stick the two together, and our leather is now ready for dampening. There is a rule of thumb with dampening that your leather should be damp all the way through but not soggy. Experience will tell you how wet to make your leather. For best results, use a plastic or ceramic or glass container and a nice clean sponge and clean water. You'll notice as I wipe the sponge over the leather that it is absorbed immediately. This is all we need to do, is go over it several times as you see me doing here with the damp sponge. And we'll put it aside now until it starts to return to its natural color. Then it will be ready for tooling. A very important tool in leathercraft is the swivel knife. It's used for many things, including all the outline cutting for your floral carving, as well as for many other things like borders and geometric type things. It is adjustable by loosening this nut, and then you can move it up and down to make it comfortable for your hand. However, before we start cutting with it, we need to tell you something very important, and that's the sharpening of a swivel knife. Now, what I've got here is some white jeweler's rouge, and I'm merely rubbing this on a piece of clean cardboard. You could do this on a piece of thin leather as well. Especially when the knife is new, it needs a lot of attention, and this is done by stropping. You hold the knife at the same angle as the blade, and then you pull it. Notice the black mark on here? This is metal and or other things that have built up on the side of the blade. Notice that I pull and lift up, pull and lift up. Turn it, pull, and lift up. Do it equally on both sides, and when your blade is new, you may need to do this for quite a while until the blade is nice and shiny on both sides, and then it should be easy for cutting. Let's do some exercises in cutting with the swivel knife. First of all, always keep your stropping board handy, and every time you pick the knife up to use it, you should strop it and wipe any of the excess dirt off of it before you start cutting. Now, it's a good idea to do that every time you pick it up, and every time if your knife begins to drag, go back to your board and strop it some more. It should go smoothly through the leather. Now you hold it just as you see me doing it here, exactly straight up and down with the first finger in the saddle or the yoke only up to the first knuckle. You shouldn't have to go any further than that. If you do, it'll be difficult for you to revolve the knife. And then you just tip it forward just so that the tip of the blade goes in and we're perpendicular from left to right. Now, let's start everything with all of the cuts coming toward my body. I tip it forward, sink it in, twist and pull. Now my water content is just right as the leather is returning to its natural color, so you see I got a nice cut that's popped open clean. To make a curve, hold the knife as though you're going to cut a straight line, revolve it, sink the blade in with the flat side facing you, twist and pull, and you should get a nice arc as I have gotten here. To the other side, hold it the same way, revolve it, sink it in, twist and pull, and you'll get a nice cut to the other side. S-cuts are also part of leathercraft. They're done by starting the same way, sink it in, twist, pull and push back, and you have a nice S. To the other side, same thing, sink it in, twist, and pull back. Good practice also is cutting circles. Do it the same way. Cut the circle to the left one way, revolve the knife, go back the other way, and see if you can get them to join up. This is very, very good practice. Straight lines, curves both ways, S's both ways, and circles. When doing a traditional Western style carving, it's first necessary to trace the pattern onto the leather. Normally, when you buy a kit or some other project, you will get a tracing pattern as you see here. The first thing we need to do our tracing is to transfer the pattern to something called tracing film. This is a transparent plastic paper of sorts. Take your project, in this case we're going to do a half back for practice and to show you how to do it. And with a pencil, draw completely around your project. No matter what the project is, you've got to first start with the exact size of your project. Now we can bring our pattern in here and carefully position it over our pattern that we're going to trace. And if you want, you can use some tape. I like to use a couple of small pieces of masking tape to fasten it so that it's much easier to handle. And we just tape these in position, and I can now do my tracing. Normally, I do the borders first, and it's a good idea to use a straight edge as you see me doing here. Now very carefully trace my borders. And after my borders are traced, I will begin tracing the rest of the design. Now, we want to make sure that we get all of the lines. So I usually start tracing, as you see here, with the big or the main part of the pattern first. Carefully going over the lines. Now from time to time, you can lift your pattern and make sure you've got all of the lines. So we'll continue tracing like this. And this is usually done after I've dampened my leather and I'm waiting for it to dry. And then by the time I've finished tracing, my leather is ready for tooling. Notice that I have carefully placed my tracing film over the dampened leather that has been allowed to come back to as it starts to return to its natural color. You can see here by the darker corners and lighter in here that it is returning to this natural color. And I have, with the two pieces of tape I used earlier, taped it in place. Now the first thing I'll do is, like I did before, I'll use my straight edge and very carefully with the stylus I will trace that line. Now let's lift it up and see. You'll see that I can see my line. It's not necessary to trace real deep, only deep enough so that you can see it. If you go too deep, you'll create a channel in there that will make cutting difficult. So only deep enough so that you can see it. Very carefully doing my 4 borders. After the borders are traced, then we can continue tracing just like we did when we traced it with the pencil. Only deep enough so that we can see it, and from time to time lift it up and check your progress. And as we did before, we will carefully trace all of the lines of our pattern. I've finished my tracing, so I'll double check to make sure that I got all my lines, and it looks like I did, so I can now remove my tracing from the leather, and I'm ready to do my swivel knife cutting. However, before I do that, I do need to strop. Always strop your knife before using it and whenever it begins to drag. As we did with the paper tracing, we'll now start with the borders first, and I think I'll start right here using my straight edge. Now you could do this without a straight edge if you have a lot of experience, but otherwise we suggest that you use a straight edge. Now I got a nice deep cut, and we'll do this with all 4 of the borders. Knife is straight up and down, and not tipped from left or right. Now, as soon as we've finished with the borders, we can start our regular cutting. Now, this is where you use the techniques that we taught you earlier. I'll do this first cut right here, and if you'll notice, this is one of our S cuts. This one over here is also an S cut. You'll find that nearly all of your cuts will be variations of the arc, the S cut, or the circle. Notice that I keep the knife straight up and down from left to right, and my cuts pop open clean. This is what your piece should look like with the swivel knife cutting completed. Notice they're popped open clean, they're smooth, and very good looking. Notice that I did not cut this one here, which will become our seed pod. I'll explain to you later why I did not cut that one. Here we have in front of us, together with the impression of each one, various stamping tools that we use. These first two are called camouflage tools. A pear shader is next. Two different tools called veiners, a beveler, a mule's foot, a seeder, and a background tool. As a rule, when we use stamping tools, we use them in several different ways. If we were doing a geometric type design, which we will show you later, or a border design, we would use the tool in its full impression like this. However, in many of the applications, we will tip the tool to one side or the other, kind of like this. And many times we will then put them in a series, as you see here. The same is true with a veiner tool. Many times we use the full impression, many times we use a partial and put it in a series. First tool we're going to use today is a camouflage tool, and we'll use two of them on this pattern. We'll begin first by putting a full impression, a slight tip, right here at the end of this fern swirl. Now we will tip this tool to the right and slowly just stamp on partial area of that stem. I'll do the same thing here on this next one, starting lightly and getting a little heavier as I go. Again, tipping it to the right. Now as I get up to the upper part of this stem, I can turn it straight up and down, as you see here, and get a nice impression. Now I'll use it also over here on this acanthus leaf, as it's called, and I'll again tip it to the right, and we will go right up one side of that cut. I want you to notice that I am using a nice plastic mallet, and also I have a marble tooling surface, which is the very best if you can find it. Now, it's available at most craft stores. I'm going to use the larger of the two now, and instead of tipping this left or right, I'm going to tip it forward and just get another different look here up the center of these flower petals. We'll do this to all three of them. This is how our piece should look when we've done all of the work with the camouflage tool. The camouflage tool is used to give color and shape to our leaves and other parts of the design. For instance, as I do this leaf, you can see that I have added color, and I have now made it this shape. Please note that as I use this tool, I'm turning it in the direction I need to so that it fits the area that I'm working in. I like to leave a little highlight or halo along the edge of the areas that I use this on. It's not a good idea to mash down your swivel cuts. Notice now how I'm using this tool. As I hold it here and as I strike it, I let it bounce back up, and as it bounces back up, I can move it and make it do what I want it to do. And I can move it sideways, I can move it forward or backward as you see me doing here, and I can then color this leaf real nicely. It's perfectly okay to go back over any of this pear shading to make it look the way you would like it to look. You can consult your pattern in the book to see how the original author of the book did it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it that way. Be creative and do your own style of things. This is how your piece should look after you have done all of the pear shading. Please note the nice color which is achieved by having the proper water content in our leather. We're now going to use the beveler tool. I've used it already along this border to illustrate how it works. By putting it on this side, as you see me doing here, then this side appears to be raised up. So the rule is you bevel away from that which you want to stand up. For instance, I've started beveling here on this flower, and you'll see I bevel on this side of the leaf. Now to do that, I just hold my tool in the cut and letting it bounce, and as it bounces I move it just like I did the pear shader earlier. You can see by doing this I have caused the entire bottom of that flower to stand up. Now to take this part here and make it stand up is just a matter of beveling along that cut. When you do your beveling, you will be mighty happy that you made nice, wide, clean cuts. See, now this part of the flower stands up. To make this leaf stand up, I'll just start here and go around the outside as you see me doing here. Doesn't matter if you push it or pull it, go in the direction that's the most comfortable for you, and it's perfectly all right to go back over it several times. There you can see now that leaf stands out. This is what our piece looks like with the beveling completed. Please note now that this entire flower stands up above the rest of the design. This is due to the fact that we beveled all the way around the outside. Notice how this fern swirl stands out, and anything we wanted to stand out now stands out, and our pattern is beautiful in bold relief and is picking up even more color because of the proper water content. We will now use two different veiner tools. I'll use the first one, this larger one, to make some impressions up along the side of this acanthus leaf. Notice that I'm turning it or leaning it to one side so that I only get a partial impression. I only want to get as much as looks good in the design. I'll now use the other one, and we'll go around this fern swirl with it. First thing, I'll lean it. This is a smaller and sharper tool, so notice I'm going closer together with my impressions, and I'm also not hitting it as hard. If we hit it just as hard as we did the other one, we would definitely create a problem with it. Notice that as I go around, I'm allowing my tool to flow. This is because each time I place it down, I point the back end to the imaginary center of this swirl. And if you'll do that each time, you'll get a nice continuation of your tools. And as I come near the end here, I'll Keep lean a little further, and tap lighter. Now we'll also use this tool to show some folds. Like on the end of this leaf, I'll tip this up, drive it rather deep to show a fold. We'll do that several other places in this design where lines come to an end. Here's a good example right here with this leaf and this leaf over here. This is how our pattern has progressed by using the veiner tool. Notice how we went around and flowed nicely around this fern swirl, up this acanthus leaf, and of course we have used it then to deepen the ends of several of these leaf cuts. And it looks like after we have used the cedar, notice we did a impression right here in the center of this fern swirl and also in the seed pod. The first thing we did, we stamped the outer row first, and we did that on the line. Remember earlier I told you not to cut that line. Well, that's because the cedar is sharp and it establishes the line nicely without cutting, and then you just fill in the rest of the seed pod. We're now going to use the mule's foot, which looks almost like a track of a mule or a horse. We'll use this kind of for decoration after a lot of these leaf endings that we did with the veiner tool, and lean it back slightly and kind of follow the path of the stem, and then just slowly taper it off, and you get a nice decoration to your work. You can do that after as many of these as you want. Notice how we just kind of space it evenly, follow the flow of the pattern, and then slowly taper it off. And that's all there is to using the mule's foot. Before we do our decorative cuts, as usual, it's important to strop the swivel knife, and it'll make for much easier cutting. Now, remember when we first talked about how to use the swivel knife? The same applies now, only maybe even a little more important, because we're going to get a nice flow if we'll follow the rules. Hold it like I was going to cut a straight line down through the center of the flower. I'll revolve the knife, sink it in, twist, and pull. Come over here, do the same thing. Now, notice that all of my decorative cuts travel down toward the center. They follow the flow. This leaf here, they follow the same flow down to the center of the flower. Turn it as necessary so it is very comfortable for you, and so that all of your cuts come toward your body. It's a little harder to cut now because, remember, the leather is no longer nice and flat. Consult your pattern to see how the original artist did the decorative cuts, and of course you can vary them and create cuts of your own. This is how our pattern looks now with the decorative cuts. Notice how all of them flow with the flow of the pattern. The last tool we're going to use is the background tool. It is used to texture and knock down areas of the background as they're indicated on your pattern. This gives your pattern a true 3D as it makes the background much darker, and of course it's now lower or deeper than the rest of the pattern. This is done when your leather is almost completely dry. The background tool is tear-shaped so that you can turn it as needed to get in areas and get them knocked down properly. Take your time. It's okay to go back over it as often as you want. Notice that I am overlapping each impression, making it nice and smooth. Here we have our finished carving, all ready for your favorite dyeing and finishing techniques. Let's take a moment to show you how to do some background dyeing. This is a spirit solvent dye, of course, and dip in the bottle and take most of it off on the edge of the bottle. And whenever you come into the leather, make sure when you make your first contact, you make it in the middle, as you see me doing here, because this dye will bleed. So start in the middle, and as your brush gets drier, then you can work over to the borders, and finally, as it's almost completely dry, work up into the sharp pointed areas. Each time, make sure you take most of it off, turn the leather as needed to make it comfortable for you, and as it dries, do the border, and as it's even almost completely dry, go into the points. It's a good idea when you have a small area, as I have right here, to start over here, and then as your brush gets drier, you can come into this area and very carefully paint the background. And this is the look you get after using dye in your background. For a protective finish, I have simply applied some of the super sheen to a piece of sheep wool, and it's simply a matter of just wiping it on. Don't need to rub hard, just wipe it on and let it go down in the impressions. And it's just a matter now of letting it sit aside until it dries. Here we have our finished piece with the finish applied and dried, and as you can see, it's a very, very beautiful piece. Anyone would be proud of one like this. Many, many designs can be created by just using the stamping tools and your imagination. Let's take a look at a few. Let's do a little stamping on this little key holder part. I'll start by using a veiner very carefully now, staying about 1/8 of an inch from the row of holes and going end to end. we will go completely around the outside of this key case part, keeping about 1/8 of an inch from the row of holes. Now as we get up here to the top, it's going to be necessary to adjust our distance from the edge a little bit, so we'll make it about 1/4 of an inch. You can put a guideline on here if you want with a dividers. However, if you're careful, you can do a good job. Now as I come here, I'm again coming in to about 1/8 of an inch from the row of holes. Now as I come on down to the bottom, I want to point out something. I get a few holes away, or a few impressions away. I'll take my tool, make a very light mark, and kind of see how this is going to work out. It's going to come very close, so maybe I'll just cheat a little bit and make my impressions a little bit not quite as touching, so that as I get here, it comes out real nice, but yet it looks like it looks like it's perfect. Now let's take the smaller the two camouflage tools and go in between the impressions of the veiner. As you see, this gives us a real nice pattern, nice design, and all we're doing is using our imagination and the tools that we have at hand. We'll go all the way around the same way. And of course, this time we don't have to worry about how it's going to come out, because that's already been done as we went around the first time. And we have a nice design, just using our imagination and the tools we had. Now, there's a big area in the middle. There are several things we could do with that. We could take our pear shader tool and just make a texture. Just move it around at random, as you see, turning it as I go so that I don't create a pattern, and it'll make a nice textured surface in here. And that's all there is to it. We have a real nice design, very little effort, just using the tools that we had and using our imagination. Using the small camouflage tool, let's create a design similar to a belt design. I'll carefully establish my corner, and I'll do the same thing down here. Now we will carefully stay along the border as we did before, staying about about 1/8 of an inch away from the line of holes. We'll come down one side. As I get near the bottom, notice that I'm going to once again use my tool to measure, and this looks like it's going to be a little tight to get 4 and too far for 3 impressions. So I'll tighten up on these last 4, overlap them ever so slightly so that when we get the impressions all in, it's really not noticeable that we crowded the last few. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side. I'm carefully checking here now to see how many impressions I can get in this end, and it looks like 4 will fit in there quite nicely if I crowd them just a little bit. So as you can see, this makes for a very professional looking end by planning that very carefully. I am very carefully making a light mark every 1/2 inch along the border here. Now I can make a light mark because I'm going to do something that would make the mark go away, but I still don't want to make it real heavy. Now I'm going to take my ruler and go across the corner, as you see here, and make a light mark that I can do something with later. Using my cedar, I'm now going to make a cedar impression at the place where all of these marks cross. Now they cross, of course, right down the center as you see, but they also cross over here where I made my mark. So I'm going to make an impression every place that these lines cross. Do this all the way down. Now I'm going to use the swivel knife and very carefully cut between all of these seed impressions. Notice that I am not cutting the seed, only the area in between. And this makes for a real nice quilted pattern. And of course it forms diamonds, as you can see. And here again we have created a really nice pattern just using our imagination and a few tools. Let's take a moment to try some antique. Notice I have placed some brown paper over my work surface here because this stuff is a stain, and it will stain things other than leather. How you use this is you put it on very heavy, as you see me doing here. Do not be concerned about how it looks at this point. Put it on very heavy, making sure that you get down in all of the impressions. Take a wadded up paper towel, as you see here, and wipe. Now you'll notice that I'm holding the towel very flat because I just want to take off the surface. I do not want to remove it from down in the tooling impressions. Now I can put a little water on my towel, which I just did, and I can take even more off, as you can see. And this makes for a very, very good looking and rich finish. I have another piece here. I'd like to show you another little trick. This piece is, of course, the key case that we did earlier. I'll take some of the same stain, the acrylic antique stain, and I'll rub it on here. Now, I did something to this one that I did not do to the other one. I used a brush and I painted the area around the border with super sheen. Now watch what happens when I wipe it off from here. See the nice two-tone effect that I get using the super sheen as a resist. I'll do the same thing now. I'll get a little bit of water on my pad, and as I wipe, it gives me a even better looking piece of work. Marvelous.